You're losing blood, and you need to lie down. Stop fighting me and let me do my job.
I'm not fighting you, Doc.
The most feared man in Seoul had one rule. Nobody survives disrespecting him twice. Amara Carter disrespected him in the first 60 seconds, bleeding, broken, and still arrogant on her exam table. And somehow, for the first time in his life, Kangmin Jae didn't want to kill her. He wanted to keep her. His empire would make him choose between the two. If you believe love should never be judged by bloodlines, borders, or a council of old men clinging to outdated power, hit subscribe right now. This story is about to go to war with tradition itself. Only the elders' allies won't smash that like button. Everyone else? Let's ride. The rain in Seoul that night didn't fall so much as it attacked, and Amara Carter had long stopped expecting gentleness from this city. 14 hours on her feet. A supply rep who tried to pass off expired gauze as a bulk discount. A grandmother convinced garlic paste cured infections, and then the door of her clinic slammed open like it owed the building money. He came in wrong, sideways, folding, one hand pressed to a wound gone past red into something closer to black. His shirt, what remained of it, had probably cost more than her monthly rent. His watch face was shattered. No wallet anywhere on him, which struck her as strange later, because men who carried themselves like this usually had someone else carry their money. Sit, she said, reaching for gloves. He didn't sit. He collapsed, which she supposed counted as a more aggressive form of compliance. Talk to me. Blood type. Allergies. Anything I should know before I put my hands inside you. You should know, he said, in English too precise to have been learned casually, that no one has spoken to me like an inconvenience in a decade. You are an inconvenience. You're bleeding on my only clean floor. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, more like surprise at the idea of one. She worked fast, muttering half to him and half to herself, the way some doctors prayed, and she cursed the entire pharmaceutical supply chain instead. She didn't ask his name. Names were for people who intended to bill her later, and she'd already decided this one wasn't leaving until she said so. You're going to scar, she told him near dawn, tying off the last stitch. I already have scars, he said. She assumed metaphor. It was not. 4 hours after sunrise, she stepped outside for coffee and found 17 black SUVs lining a street that had never hosted anything shinier than a delivery scooter. Men in dark suits stood in the rain like they'd been poured there. The neighborhood, usually loud with vendors and stray dogs, had gone silent the way a room goes silent when a very expensive predator has just arrived and everyone is deciding whether to run. Amara looked at the small army assembled for one sleeping man wrapped in a discount market blanket and thought, well, that's not a bicycle accident. She went back inside. She checked his vitals. She did not check his pockets, call the police, or ask a single question about the army outside. 12 years of emergency medicine had taught her that the questions people actually needed answered were rarely the ones anyone answered honestly. He woke to find her charting notes, unbothered. You should be afraid of me, he said. Not a threat, a genuine, troubled question, like the fear should have arrived by now and its absence unsettled him. I should be a lot of things, she said, not looking up. Afraid of you is third on the list, behind annoyed you didn't mention the 17 SUVs and annoyed you bled on the floor I just mopped. He laughed, rusty, like a door that hadn't opened in years and wasn't sure it remembered how. Somewhere across the city, in a room paneled with old wood and older grudges, 6 men who called themselves elders were already hearing whispers of the woman who'd stitched their leader back together. Men who'd spent 5 generations deciding who was allowed to sit beside a throne and who wasn't. Men who believed loyalty could be inherited and love could be managed like a liability on a balance sheet. They would spend the next 6 months trying to erase her. If you've ever watched a family, a company, or a tradition decide someone doesn't belong simply because they didn't arrive the right way, drop a comment and tell me, do the old rules deserve protecting or burning down? Like and subscribe if you believe people should be judged by their character, not their bloodline. This story is about to test that line. Hard. He did not yet know her name. She did not yet know his. Neither of them knew that the 6 men across the city had already begun sharpening their objections into something with teeth, and that Kang Min Jae, For the first time since burying his father and inheriting a kingdom built on fear, had absolutely no intention of walking away from the one person who wasn't afraid of him at all. By the time Min-jae could stand without wincing, three things had happened that nobody bothered to tell Amara about, because in his world, information was currency and she hadn't yet earned a seat at that particular table. The first, his second in command, a man named Tae Yang who'd grown up beside him. Same streets, same scars, same funeral for the same father figure, had already made 2 phone calls that never should have happened. Quiet ones, the kind made from a car with the windows up. The second, the Council of 7, the 6 surviving elders who governed marriages and murders with the same bureaucratic calm, had received a report, not from spies, from a nurse at the clinic who'd been paid enough to forget she had a conscience. The third, Min-jae had started coming back, not for medical reasons. His private physician, a soft-spoken man who charged more per hour than Amara's clinic made in a month, had cleared him after 72 hours. And yet, 4 days later, there he was again, sitting on her exam table like he owned it, which, technically, given how much he donated to her supply fund under a fake name, he almost did. "You do know," Amara said, not looking up from a chart, "that I have actual patients, people with actual emergencies, not billionaires who've decided my waiting room is a nice place to sulk." "I'm not sulking. You've been staring at that wall for 11 minutes? I'm thinking." "About what?" "About how you're the first person in 20 years who hasn't asked me for anything." She finally looked at him. Really looked. Not at the suit, not at the men parked outside like decorative shrubbery, but at the tired eyes of a man who'd clearly built an empire and never once been asked how he was doing. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I want you to stop smoking, take your antibiotics, and get out of my clinic so I can see the woman with the toddler who's been waiting 40 minutes. That's very unromantic." "I'm not trying to be romantic. I'm trying to keep you alive, which apparently is a full-time job." He laughed again. The same rusty sound, except this time it came easier, like the door was finally remembering how it used to swing. What she didn't know, what she wouldn't know for another 2 weeks, was that her name had already been written into a file thicker than most of her medical charts. Photographs of her walking to the market, a record of her Atlanta residency, a note underlined twice by someone's careful hand that read, "American, Black, no family ties to Korea, no leverage." No leverage was the phrase that terrified them most. In a room across the city, dark wood, older grudges, 6 men sat around a table that had settled more disputes through silence than most courts settled through law. The eldest among them, a man named Il-sung, whose father had helped write the very rules he now enforced, tapped one finger against the table like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. "5 generations," he said, "married in, not once, out." "He hasn't married her," said another. "He's stitched together, that's all. Gratitude. It happens to wounded men." "Gratitude doesn't visit a clinic 4 times in 10 days, Il-sung said. "Gratitude doesn't smile." Silence settled over the table the way it always did before a decision nobody wanted to say out loud yet. "She's a doctor?" someone offered, almost hopefully. "Not ambitious, not political. Perhaps she's harmless." Il-sung's expression didn't change. "The harmless ones are the ones who change kings," he said. "Ambitious women can be bought. This one wants nothing. That makes her the only threat in this city we can't buy, frighten, or predict." Nobody argued. Back at the clinic, unaware that her name had just been spoken like a verdict in a language she didn't speak, Amara handed Min-jae a printed sheet of medication instructions and pointed at the door. "Go home. Rest. Try for once in your very dramatic life to not almost die." "And if I come back?" She paused, just long enough for something to shift between them, something neither of them had a name for yet, something that had nothing to do with stitches or bloodlines or empires. "Then bring coffee," she said. "The good kind, not the burnt clinic garbage." He left smiling, the real kind this time, unpracticed and slightly embarrassing on a face built for intimidation. Outside, Tae-yang watched him go, jaw tight, already calculating exactly how useful a forbidden romance might become to a man who'd spent 12 years waiting his turn. 3 weeks in, Amara noticed the same black sedan parked across from her apartment for the second night in a row and made the entirely reasonable decision to march over and knock on the window. The man inside, mid-30s, unbothered, dressed like he'd wandered out of a much more expensive part of the city, rolled it down exactly 2 inches. "You're bad at this," she said. "At what?" "Following someone. You've been here since Tuesday. I have neighbors. They talk. Mrs. O 2 doors down already thinks you're either a debt collector or my secret boyfriend. And honestly, at this point, I'd almost prefer debt collector." The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence had the specific weight of someone who'd been told, explicitly, not to engage. She went back inside, made tea, and didn't sleep, which was how Min Jae found her the next afternoon, tired, irritated, and completely unimpressed when she demanded, without preamble, "Why do I have a bodyguard I didn't ask for?" He didn't deny it. That, at least, she appreciated. Powerful men, in her experience, usually reached for a lie first, and the truth only under duress. Min Jae simply said, "Because there are people in this city who would use you to hurt me, and I would rather you be annoyed than dead. That's not your decision to make." "No," he agreed. "It isn't. I made it anyway." It should have made her angrier than it did. Instead, standing in her cramped apartment with its one working lamp and its stack of unpaid clinic invoices, she found herself doing the thing she'd been actively avoiding for 3 weeks, actually looking at him. Not the suits, not the SUVs. The man underneath, who'd apparently decided that keeping her alive was worth risking whatever fragile piece he'd built his empire on. "You could just tell me things," she said quietly, "instead of surrounding me with strangers in sedans." "I could. Why don't you?" "Because the truth," he said, "tends to get people killed faster than silence does. I've spent my whole life protecting people by keeping them in the dark. You're the first person I've wanted to protect by telling them everything, and I don't know how to do that yet." It was, she'd admit only to herself later, the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. Across the city, the honesty flowed in the opposite direction. Yang sat across from Il Sung in a tea house that had hosted quieter conversations about louder crimes, and delivered his report with the practiced calm of a man who'd rehearsed every word twice. "She's not political," he said. "Not connected. But she's not naive either. She noticed the surveillance within 48 hours. She's smarter than we accounted for." "And him?" "Distracted." Tiang let the words sit there, heavy with implication. "He canceled the Busan shipment meeting last week. First time in 6 years he's missed a logistics call." Il Sung's face remained unreadable, but something in his posture sharpened. "For her?" "For her." It was exactly the sentence Taeyang needed spoken aloud in that room, by that man, and he'd engineered the entire meeting to produce it. He hadn't lied. Min Jae had missed the meeting. What Taeyang left out was that he himself had rescheduled it without telling anyone. Precisely so, the story would sound the way he needed it to sound. Manipulation, done well, rarely required outright lies, just very careful omissions, delivered at very careful moments. "The council will need to act," Il Sung said, "formally, before this becomes something we can't contain." "What would you have them do?" Il Sung's eyes were the color of old ash. "Whatever it takes to remind him what he stands to lose." That night, Min Jae sat across from Amara at a street food stall she'd insisted on. No reservations, no security posturing as waitstaff, just plastic stools and grilled meat that cost less than the wine he usually drank in a single glass. "Tell me something true," she said. Chopsticks paused midair. "Something you've never told anyone." He considered it for a long moment, the kind of silence that used to make grown men reconsider their choices. Now just a man deciding how much of himself he was willing to hand to someone who'd never asked for any of it. "I've never been in love before," he finally said. "I didn't think I was built for it. I thought whatever part of a person does that had been removed a long time ago, along with everything else I lost becoming who I am. And now? Now I'm terrified," he said, "that I finally found it. In the one place my entire world will never let me keep it." 3 streets away, a car idled with its lights off, and a phone camera captured the two of them laughing over shared plates. Evidence, soon to be delivered into hands that had already decided what to do with it. The photograph reached the council within 6 hours. Grainy, taken from a car window, but unmistakable. Kang Min-jae laughing. Not the practiced half-smile he wore for photographers and rival negotiators, but an actual, unguarded laugh, the kind that made him look 10 years younger and infinitely more dangerous, because a man who laughs like that has clearly stopped calculating. Il-sung set the photograph on the table like it was evidence in a trial, which, in every way that mattered, it was. "He's not distracted," said one of the younger elders, a man named Do-hyun who'd always privately admired Min-jae's ruthlessness and was now watching it apparently dissolve in real time. "He's gone." "Then we bring him back," Il-sung said. The summons arrived the next morning, delivered not by phone or text. Men like Min-jae didn't do business over anything traceable, but by an envelope, hand-carried, sealed with the wax stamp that had governed the organization since before his father was born. He read it once, standing in his office with the city spread out gray and indifferent below him, and felt something in his chest go very quiet. "The council requests your presence, formally, regarding a matter of tradition." 6 words that meant, "We know, and we've decided it matters more than you do." He didn't tell Amara. Not yet. Some part of him, the same part that had once believed silence was protection, still thought he could handle the council alone, the way he'd handled everything alone since he was 19 years old, and burying a father who taught him that love was a liability line item, best kept off the books entirely. He was wrong, and he'd learn exactly how wrong within the hour. The council chamber smelled like old wood polish and older certainty. 6 men sat where 7 once had, a chair permanently empty since a founding family's line had ended decades ago, in a manner nobody discussed at dinner. Min-jae stood before them the way he had 100 times, hands loose at his sides, face arranged into the particular stillness that had once made rival bosses reconsider entire business models. "You know why you're here," Il-sung said. "I assume it isn't my birthday." Nobody laughed. Elders, as a rule, did not find humor a suitable accompaniment to tradition. 5 generations, Il-sung continued, sliding the photograph across the table, have married within the 7 founding families. Not because we lack imagination, Min-jae, because the arrangement is the only thing standing between order and 7 ambitious families deciding they'd rather run this organization through bullets than blood ties. I'm aware of the history. Then you're aware, Il-sung said, that this woman represents a structural failure, not a romantic one, a structural one. She has no family here to negotiate with, no debts to leverage, nothing to lose that we can threaten. Do you understand what that means?" "It means," Min-jae said quietly, "that for the first time in my life, someone loves me without wanting anything from me. I understand exactly what that means. I don't think you do." The silence that followed had teeth in it. "We are not asking," Il-sung said. "We are informing you. End it. Quietly, cleanly, before this becomes a fracture the families can exploit. Or don't. And watch what happens when 6 families decide the throne is no longer stable enough to respect." Min-jae looked at each of them in turn. Men who'd known his father, who'd watched him bury a man twice, who'd taught him everything he knew about power, and had apparently taught him nothing at all about what it was actually for. "You built an empire on the idea that loyalty could be inherited," he said. "I'm going to show you what happens when it's earned instead." He walked out without waiting to be dismissed, which hadn't happened in that chamber in 30 years, and by the time he reached the street, his phone was already buzzing. Taeyang, calling with a voice pitched to sound concerned, reporting that 2 of the 7 families had already begun making calls of their own. What Min-jae didn't know yet, wouldn't know for another week until it was almost too late to matter, was that Taeyang wasn't reporting the fires. He was setting them. If a system decided you weren't allowed to love someone simply because you didn't check the right boxes, would you burn the whole thing down or play by the rules? Comment below. And if you believe love shouldn't answer to bloodlines, bank accounts, or boardrooms, hit subscribe. The elders in this story sure won't. Amara found out the way most people find out the worst news of their lives. Accidentally, badly, and at the worst possible hour. She was closing the clinic, exhausted, arguing with herself over whether to eat dinner or just go straight to bed, when her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. No name attached. Just a photograph. The same grainy image the council had passed around their table. Her and Min-jae laughing over street food. Time-stamped, dated, unmistakably private. And a single line of text beneath it. "Ask him what the Council of 7 is. Then ask him what happens to women like you." She read it 4 times before the words rearranged themselves into something that made sense. And even then, it didn't fully land. Not the way real threats usually did, with the immediate adrenaline of an emergency room crisis. This was slower, colder. The kind of fear that didn't ask your body to run, just asked your mind to sit very still and start reconsidering every warm thing you'd let yourself feel over the last 3 weeks. She called him. He answered on the second ring, and something in his voice, a beat too careful, a fraction too calm, told her he already knew what she was about to ask before she asked it. "Who is the Council of Seven?" she said. Silence. Not evasive silence. The silence of a man deciding, finally, that the truth was overdue. "Come to the penthouse," he said. "Please. I'll tell you everything." She almost didn't go. Some old, sensible part of her, the part that had survived Atlanta's ER on nothing but caffeine and boundaries, told her to pack a bag and take the next flight home instead. But she'd built her entire life on not walking away from bleeding, complicated things just because they were bleeding and complicated. And apparently that instinct didn't have an off switch for men either. He told her everything. The bloodlines. The 5 generations of marriages disguised as diplomacy. The elders who governed his empire's stability the way a spine governs a body. Invisible, essential, and utterly intolerant of anything that threatened its alignment. He told her about his father, about the throne he'd inherited soaked in more grief than glory, about a childhood that had taught him love was a resource other people used against you. Right up until the night she told him to stop being dramatic about a gunshot wound, and he'd realized, for the first time, that someone could want nothing from him at all. "So, I'm a structural risk," she said flatly, once he'd finished. That's the actual phrase they used. Yes. Not dangerous, not unqualified. A structural risk. Like I'm a crack in a foundation. "Amara." "No, I get it," she said, and the calm in her voice was worse than shouting would have been. "I've spent my whole life being the thing certain rooms weren't built for. The wrong doctor for certain patients' comfort. The wrong hire for certain hospital boards. I'm familiar with the argument. I just didn't expect to hear it from a Korean crime council instead of a hospital HR department. I'm not going to let them." "Let them what, Min-jae? Threaten me? They already have." She held up her phone, the anonymous message still glowing on the screen. "Someone already sent me a warning tonight. So the theoretical danger you're describing isn't theoretical anymore. It's Tuesday." That got his attention in a way the council's summons hadn't. He crossed the room, took the phone from her hands, and read the message twice, his jaw tightening in a way she recognized now. Not performance, not intimidation for an audience. Actual fear, badly disguised as anger, for the first time since she'd met him. "I'll find out who sent this," he said. "I know you will." She met his eyes, steady despite everything. "The question is what you're going to do once you know." He didn't answer immediately, and in the silence, something settled between them. Not fear exactly, and not doubt either, but the specific gravity of two people realizing at the same moment that the easy part of this, the flirting, the street food, the stolen afternoons, was over. What came next would cost something. They just didn't yet know how much or from whom. 3 floors below, in a car parked exactly where it shouldn't have been, Taeyang watched the penthouse lights and smiled the small, satisfied smile of a man whose plan had just worked exactly as intended. The message, it turned out, hadn't come from the council at all. A fact Min-jae discovered within 48 hours, thanks to a cybersecurity specialist he kept on retainer for exactly this kind of problem, and paid handsomely enough that the man never asked questions he didn't want answered. The number traced back to a burner phone, purchased in cash, activated for exactly 9 hours before it went permanently dark. Untraceable, if you didn't know what to look for. Min-jae knew exactly what to look for. The purchase location, 3 blocks from a tea house his own second-in-command frequented more often than business required. He didn't say anything yet. He'd learned, over 20 years of surviving men who wanted his throne, that the worst thing you could do to a traitor was let them know you'd found them before you understood the entire shape of what they'd built. So instead, he watched. Taeyang, in the days that followed, was a portrait of loyalty, visiting Min-jae's office twice daily with logistics updates, expressing careful, well-timed concern about the council's mood, offering, more than once, to handle the Amara situation personally so Min-jae wouldn't have to. Every sentence was calibrated to sound like devotion. Min-jae had once believed every word of it. Now he watched Taeyang the way you watch a wound you're not sure has finished bleeding, carefully and from a distance. You should let me talk to the elders, Taeyang said, over drinks neither of them were actually drinking. Smooth things over. They trust me. Do they? Of course. Taeyang smiled, easy as ever. I've known them since I was a boy. So have I, Min-jae said. And yet, somehow, only one of us seems to know exactly what worries them before they've said it out loud. Something flickered behind Taeyang's eyes. Small, quickly smoothed over, but there. Min-jae had spent his whole life reading exactly that flicker on other men's faces, right before they reached for a weapon or a lie. He'd simply never expected to see it on someone who'd sat beside him at his father's funeral. Amara, for her part, had stopped waiting to be protected and started doing what she did best, paying attention to details other people missed, the same instinct that let her catch a misdiagnosis 6 other doctors had walked past. She'd kept the anonymous photograph. More importantly, she'd kept the metadata, a habit picked up from a med school friend paranoid about patient privacy, and noticed something Min-jae's expensive specialist hadn't bothered to check. The photo had been taken from an angle 2 feet higher than a parked sedan window. From a rooftop belonging to a tea house Min-jae had mentioned once, in passing, as a place Taeyang liked to conduct quiet business. She didn't tell Min-jae immediately. She told him over dinner plainly, the way she delivered difficult diagnoses to frightened patients, without drama, because drama rarely helped anyone survive anything. Your friend didn't send that message, she said, but I think he's the reason it got sent. Min-jae set down his chopsticks. Explain. She did. The photo angle, the tea house, the timeline that didn't match Taeyang's own account of where he'd been that week. It wasn't proof. It was a thread. But threads, pulled correctly, unraveled entire men. He's wanted this longer than you've known me, she said quietly. I'm not the target, Min-jae. I'm the excuse. For a long moment, Min-jae said nothing. And in his silence, she watched 2 decades of misplaced loyalty quietly, permanently, come apart. The council meets again in 4 days, he finally said. Formal session. They'll expect an answer. End it or lose the throne. And Taeyang? Will be counting on me walking in alone, Min-jae said. The way I always have. Believing I have no one who'd fight for me but men who report to him. Amara reached across the table and took his hand. Not gently, not performatively, just firmly. The same way she gripped a patient's wrist when she needed them to trust her through something painful. Then let's give him a different ending, she said. Outside, 4 floors below street level, in a room built for decisions that had never once been overturned. 6 elders were already drafting the words they intended to use to end this, never suspecting that the woman they'd labeled a structural risk had just found the actual crack in their foundation. The council chamber had never once, in 5 generations, hosted a woman. Il-sung noted this fact out loud, almost conversationally, as Min-jae walked in holding Amara's hand instead of the silence he usually wore like armor. Every elder rose. Not in respect, Il-sung made that distinction with visible relish, to deliver a verdict already written. Kang Min-jae, Il-sung said, you were given a choice. It appears you've made the wrong one. I made the only one that made sense, Min-jae said. You gave me an empire built on fear and called it tradition. I'd like to show you what happens when it's built on something else instead. Sentiment, Il-sung said, isn't structural? Neither are forged documents, Amara said. The room went very quiet. She stepped forward, not dramatically, not the way people did in films, but the way she approached every difficult case, calm, clinical, entirely unimpressed by the theater of the room. She placed a folder on the table, the same one she'd built over 4 sleepless nights with a lawyer friend and a forensic photo analyst who owed her a favor from a gunshot wound she'd once treated off the books. The photograph you used to justify tonight's session, she said, was taken from a rooftop belonging to a tea house 3 blocks from a phone activated for exactly 9 hours before it went dark. That tea house is one Taeyang visits, by his own admission, several times a week. The timeline he gave the council for that same week doesn't match his phone records, which, conveniently, someone forgot to have erased. Il-sung's eyes moved, slow and deliberate, to Taeyang, who had gone very still in the way men go still right before they decide whether to run or lie harder. This is absurd, Taeyang said. A doctor's theory. A doctor's evidence, Amara corrected. I diagnose things for a living. Usually it's disease. Tonight it's you. He didn't need Min Jae distracted by me, she continued, turning back to the council. He needed him distracted, period. I was just the cheapest, most convenient story available. A forbidden romance is easier to weaponize than 12 years of quiet resentment over a throne he never got. Il-sung studied the documents for a long, silent moment. Long enough for Taeyang's carefully maintained composure to finally crack at the edges. Long enough for 6 old men to recalculate in real time exactly who had been managing whom. Is this true? Il-sung asked Taeyang directly. Taeyang said nothing, which, in that room, had always been its own kind of confession. The council, Il-sung said slowly, does not appreciate being used as a weapon in someone else's succession plan. What followed happened fast, the way endings to 20-year friendships always do. Security called, a title stripped, a man who'd smiled at family dinners for 2 decades escorted out under the exact silence he'd once tried to engineer for his own gain. The empire didn't fall that night. Its foundation cracked open instead, exposing precisely which men had been standing on rot the whole time, and precisely which woman had been standing, unbothered, on solid ground. Il-sung looked at Amara for a long moment afterward, something unreadable passing behind his ash-colored eyes. You could have let him fall, he said. Taeyang would have destroyed Min Jae for you and solved your problem without a single risk to yourself. I don't build my life on other people's ruin, Amara said, even when it'd be convenient. That, Il-sung said quietly, is either the most dangerous thing I've ever heard or the wisest. I haven't decided which. Take your time, she said. I've got a clinic to run. 6 months later, the leaking roof finally got fixed, quietly, through a donation with no name attached, the same way Min Jae had been paying for supplies since the night she'd stitched him back together. The 17 SUVs had long since stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling, absurdly, like furniture. You know, Amara said, watching him argue, badly, with her stubborn grandmother patient about garlic paste. For the most feared man in Seoul, you're remarkably easy to boss around. Only for you, he said. That's dangerous information to give a woman who once diagnosed a conspiracy in her spare time. He laughed. No longer rusty, no longer unpracticed. Just a man who'd built an empire from nothing. And finally, for the first time in his life, hadn't had to burn anything down to keep the one thing that actually mattered.